from Music for All and presented by Yamaha. Welcome to teaching social emotional learning through music. And now, here's your host, Scott Edgar.
Hi, I'm Scott Edgar. Welcome to our next episode of Teaching Social and Emotional Learning Through Music. We've often said that when we limit music education to performance, we are limiting the experiences that we're able to give our students, and especially from the perspective of social and emotional learning. When we look at the opportunities that music education can provide, yes, performance, but also creating, connecting, responding. When we embrace those other elements, that's when SEL has so many more natural intersections. Well, friends, today we are in for a treat. We are all looking for more opportunities to embed creativity and composition into the music classroom. So we said, well, let's go to the best. So, my friend Beata Moon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. It's great to be here with you all.
Oh, so good. And I cannot wait to explore your role as a composer, as an educator, and your identity and how that all feeds into how we can help our students embrace their identity and really increase student agency in the end. So, Beata, could you please help us better understand what brought you to this space and what you do to really start to embed your identity as a composer with your identity as a teacher?
Sure. Well, I started off as a piano major. I was a pianist. I was raised in the traditional Asian way where children were kind of told what to do. So my sister and I took piano lessons. And it wasn't until I reached college when I was at Juilliard when I realized everyone is so passionate about what they're doing. And I kind of didn't feel the same way. I mean, I thought I loved music, I enjoyed it, but I didn't have that same kind of drive and um, individual, creativity or just people really knowing what they wanted. So I started my master's degree, and then I just decided I can't do this anymore without taking some time off. I took some time off, and I actually stopped playing for a while, and that's how I discovered composing and teaching. It was first out of necessity because I needed to find work, and I saw that there was an opening for a pianist for a modern dance class and also a music teacher in the Bronx. And I hadn't really had experience in any of them, but I needed work and I thought I would give it a try. And both of those experiences really opened doors and pathways to helping me find myself and my voice. And I eventually went back to performing. But when I taught K through 8 in the Bronx, it was a private Catholic school, so it was fine that I wasn't, certified. I just learned so much because I had the assumption that, oh, everyone knows what a melody is. Everyone, had similar maybe exposure to music that I had growing up because I grew up in Indiana. And I remember in school we had chorus, we had glee club, we had all of that. And these kids did not. And so I just started to read more books about education. I tried to find ways to connect with them. And at the same time, I was like composing or learning to improvise. I had not improvised a single note before. I improvised for dance class. I started just to explore creatively. And I'm just so grateful for having taken the time off because sometimes a lot of us, like, we think that we're on a certain path and that's not necessarily it. And so sometimes we need to take the time and find out what it is, to find out who we are. And so the teaching and the composing really made me realize how much music is a big part of my life. And the composing, especially, um, just made me realize how that could be brought into teaching, especially music education, because as you have been saying, along with student agency and student creativity, that's all part of the process. So
So interesting when we talk about needing time to reflect, time to take a step back and have that perspective. I think so many of our teachers right now are in that exact space. They've been just bamboozled by so many things these last 2.5 years. And we see so many teachers who are just hitting points of burnout. questioning their paths. And it's because we don't have that time to take that step back and say, so
Right.
yeah.
I mean, I think everybody, regardless of profession, really needs to take time to reflect and take time for themselves, because that's just towards better health and, becoming better at who you are as a human being and whatever that you're doing.
100%. And when we look at it from this perspective of how do you make time to do so when it's just we know the schedules that our teachers have. We know the schedules that our teaching artists have. They are wall to wall. This really does get down to this idea of what does SEL mean for our teachers, for our adults? And there's no way that we're going to be able to pass on any of this facilitation if we don't take care of ourselves.
Right. And I think it does start with the self, because that saying where when you're in the airplane, you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can put it on. It's the same thing, that you need to take care of yourself. And I feel like it has to be incorporated. It's like SEL, social emotional, is part of us as human beings. Like, we can't just separate it. If we're not well emotionally, we're not going to do our best for anyone else. So even if it's like incorporating breathing or incorporating some creative choice making, I think that allows students to feel like they have some say that can still be incorporated into the classroom. Like, even with warm up or scales, you can give them choice. Well, let's do it in this mood or this rhythm, so that you're still doing technique, but you're incorporating choice and also own awareness of emotions.
So we're going to delve into the weeds of what your vision is for music education with creativity. But I do want to parse one thing out that you said right from the start. You talked about improvisation and composition. And when we talk about creativity in music education, that's typically the limit, right? So we say, we want you to be creative. Well, of course, I'm going to either improvise or I'm going to compose. And we have very narrow definitions of that, right? So we think that improvisation needs to be in the jazz classroom, and we think that composition needs to be in the music theory classroom. Can you talk a little bit about your vision for creativity and how it broadens on the limitations that I just suggested?
Right. I mean, looking back at my training, when I was learning piano, I don't remember ever a teacher saying, "Oh, make something up or compose your own piece or improvise." It was very strictly kind of traditional classical Western European music. And actually, at Juilliard, in one of my theory classes, we had to write a fugue as an assignment. So that was really maybe my first time I composed. And I think that sometimes, even in that training, it can be too much like, this is one way to do it, there's right and wrong, and that just inhibits people. And for me, like, I was never took composition lessons. And actually, I have composer friends who are saying, "You're so lucky, you don't have all these, like, ideas that are kind of set." So I came about composing as just as a need to express myself in a different way. So for me, and improvising, like for this dance class, it was like, watching the dancers movement, like, and Mary Anthony, it was Mary Anthony dance class, and then I did later for like Lamone and Alvin Ailey and other modern dance class. But it was just learning to be in the moment and to let go and to not be so judgmental, because my first improvisations were like really, you know I mean, it wasn't jazzy at all. It was more minimalist or whatever. But I think it's just everyone allowing themselves to just try things without that harsh judgment, like, "Oh, that sounds bad," or "That's wrong." And I think because a lot of traditional, the way that musicians are traditionally taught, we're not given that freedom as students to just try. And improvising doesn't mean jazz only. Like, you can, like Mozart, all the composers back then did it on their own. It didn't become so specialized till later. So I think it first starts with the teacher and the musician just allowing yourself to compose and improvise, and then sharing that with your students. And for me, I kind of believe that everyone has something to say and everyone can compose, whether or not they become a professional composer. But I think everyone has something to say musically, and it doesn't have to be so like, oh, theory, or follow these rules. Like, there's a lot of rules that we learn about music theory, which, I mean, I try to absorb and learn as much as I can. But then when I'm composing, I don't want to think about that necessarily. I really, for me, it's about inspiration. Like, what am I inspired by? What am I trying to communicate? What feelings am I trying to convey? Because I feel like it's all about communication and making connection.
And as you said, what you just finished, I heard SEL all the way through there. It's about communication. It's about expression of emotion. It's about understanding what voice I want to have presented. And I think oftentimes um, our traditional music education presents it as a space of interpreting someone else's voices, right? So here's the dots on a page, and then my voice is going to be limited to how I can interpret that, as opposed to authentic creation of putting voice out there. So
Right.
let me, oh, please.
No, 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 I was agreeing.
So with that, I think we're starting to get a little bit of what is your interpretation of this broad thing called SEL, because there's no one right definition of what this is. So if you could just say, what does SEL mean to you?
Well, I think um, we as human beings, we're social creatures and we're all about community. I think we all need one another. And we have emotions. And I feel like a lot of times in different cultures in society, like we're taught, oh no, you have to be happy all the time. Like we just kind of a section off the different emotions, like, oh, it's don't be angry, don't be sad, or but in reality, is like as humans, we have all these emotions. The distinction needs to be made is that we don't need to act on all these emotions. So I'm going to feel angry, but that doesn't mean like I punch a wall. If I feel angry, maybe I'm going to create a piece or I'm going to do something to help, in a positive, constructive way that can help address that or pain, because we're suffering right now. So many people are struggling. There's so much trauma. And I feel like we have all these feelings, and it's learning how to hold space for the negative, the trauma, the pain, the anger, but also the joy. Like we can have both because it's so much going on all the time. And I have found like because I also at that time in college when I was exploring, I discovered therapy, which really helped me learn about my own emotions and feelings. And that has really helped me, I think, as an educator, just being able to realize, oh wait, why am I reacting this way, what's going on, and realizing helping kids and others be aware of, like, maybe you're tired, maybe you're hungry, and maybe that's why you're acting out. And maybe we can have like a tired warm up, or we can, how do we acknowledge who we are but then still get to what we need to do. And I think it's really because as human beings we all need to be seen and heard, and we need to accept who we are and what we're feeling. It's allowing space for that. And I think music, you know and creating music really allows for that to happen.
It's the outlet, right? So, I mean, when we say that we embrace toxic positivity as a culture.
Yeah,
We certainly do. And if we look at the five core ideas of emotion, the movie Inside Out got it right. And if we look at those five emotions, th- four out of the five could be perceived as negative. So,
right,
what do we do to think about those up emotions and down emotions and provide uh, constructive ways, constructive outlets, both in and out of school? So, let's dig a little bit deeper into what this looks like in the music classroom. And obviously, you bring a space with creativity, and especially given your background that you never sat through a composition class. So I would say that, not that every single composer doesn't bring a certain level of creativity to the space, but we know that certain composers have quotas, right? So they need to put out like 10 pieces, and here's the template. I'm sure that limits creativity. So Beata, can you talk just a little bit about your personal composition approach?
sure. It differs, like if I have a commission where there's certain parameters, of course, but when I'm composing, I really for me it's about communicating what am I trying to say. And a lot of times, like lately, I mean, it's through composing that's helped me through these difficult times where there's just so many feelings and so many layers and so many things going on that it's like, how can I find a way to express it? Um so it starts with an inspiration and a mood. And I think for me, since I'm a pianist, I go to the piano. I kind of just like let my hands go wherever they go. And then that's kind of like my starting musical sound idea. And then I go from there. And I just try to have fun. I really do feel like we have to go back into kind of like a childlike mindset when we're just exploring and we're not being afraid, oh no, this is wrong, this is bad. But just like when we were younger, we just played, and it's like playing. And so um, I think it's helpful, like if as educators, like that we allow ourselves to do that, and then that's how we can share it with our students and show our vulnerabilities and show like, oh, this doesn't work, or oh, might revise this. Like it's not about getting a masterpiece. Like not all of Mozart's pieces were masterpieces. And it's just about expressing yourself. And yes,
Absolutely. And, we had a great conversation on this series with Alex Shapiro and Jody Blackshaw, just dear friends. And they both spoke to how different composers think differently about how they enter into the process. Some composers are rhythm first, some are melody first, some are texture first. Is there a particular space that you find natural for yourself?
I think melody and rhythm probably is where I would go after. Like I'm finding, what I'm trying to express. So
And that's just such a powerful way that works for you. When you would to see this working with, let's say, specifically K-12 students, what are some strategies that you could provide for music teachers or teaching artists to explore this heart? Because I could see, and I'm not being a cynic because I believe wholeheartedly with what you're saying, but I could see, well, what does this look like with a class of 30? What does
right.
this look like in a space where we want our students to be creative? Uh, what's a process that we can make this a little bit more tangible?
Right. Well, I think it does, of course, as with any classroom experience, starting with strong relationships between the teacher and the students, and having a safe space where they feel like they can take risks. And as a teaching artist, like I visit the classrooms like for a limited time. I'm not there. I used to teach, when I taught way back when in the Bronx, but I'm there for like 6 to 10 visits or something. So initially it's like introductions, like creating a safe space, maybe making co-creating community agreements just so that everyone knows what to expect. And I do find that kids are really a lot of times very comfortable with rhythm, because I think we all have rhythm. And so just starting off with a game where it's like a copy game, I do a clap, they would clap back, and they realize, oh, I could do this. And then like, who wants to volunteer? Make up your own. And so just like getting them a little bit more comfortable, like someone made a rhythm, okay, and then taking, well, let's make it a little longer, or what happens like if we, so actually I happen to have a prop here. Like if we have, like I have this emoji, like, okay, let's try it in this mood, or let's try this mood, the same rhythm, but just, trying it different ways, and then noticing, oh, well, what happened? Oh, we got louder, we got softer, we got faster, whatever. You can bring in musical terms, and then just expanding, and then them realizing like, oh, I just made this up. So I think with a larger classroom, creating a group piece together to model first, so they're making creative choices, like what's going to happen, like, well, what is going to be like our inspiration if we are going by moods? Is this going to start off angry and then going to be happy, or is it going to be sad all the way through? And then do we want to use that same rhythm? And then it's just giving them choices so that they have parameters, because I think if there's just too much, like be creative, like that's just too much. They need to have choices, like, okay, you can use clapping, body percussion, or whatever instruments. And then just example of mapping it out, like just with graphically, like you don't have to, like, what's our beginning, middle, end, just like a story. We're going to start this off, then it's going to change. And then, so there's a map. And then afterwards, maybe working in smaller groups, and then individually too. But so that's kind of how I've done it in the classroom. That's worked.
I adore everything that you just said, and thank you for giving us a few tangible ideas in terms of those your show and tells. I appreciate that. Um, so I saw a lot of graphic notation. I saw a lot of things that didn't look like four spaces and five lines. How important is it for us to document this in either a traditional or non-traditional way?
I think it's good for, especially if you're creating the classroom and you want to remember what you just did, that either to have a recording or to have it graphically notated. And then later, like, because we're all different learners. And I think I myself, like as a music teacher, always just assumed, oh, we're all listening because, you're musicians or you music students. But some people are more visual learners, so that's where the graphic, notation could help a little bit more, or putting movement in there. So like they know that this mood is going to be a little bouncy, or this one is going to be, flowing, or so, and just incorporating different learning styles. And I think there's ways to then delve deeper into music theory, but um, to not intimidate with like this rhythm, because a lot of times kids will come up with really complex rhythms that I would have difficulty notating, but so it's just easier to do dots, or record it, and then realize like, hey, this is what you just did. And when they see it actually written on the staff, it's like, whoa, that's what they just made up themselves. So it's building confidence as well in their own musical voices and creative choices.
I think that's huge because I think oftentimes we think, well, they composed or improvised. I think this is where we kind of get into that shades of gray of, is this improvisation? Is this composition? And what's the difference? And certainly we could get into an hour-long conversation just on that, and I think we would be very divisive for the profession if we got into that conversation. But I think the formalization is often the point that's intimidating for people who maybe don't see their identity as a composer. And I think what you've suggested is a way to provide a much more natural entry point into saying, I am a composer.
Right. And then also incorporating, um, showing them composers of all different backgrounds, and, not only the Western, composers of the past, but just all around the world, and just showing that so many people are still are composing now that they may not be aware of. So,
Well, I mean, clearly now we're getting into a space of equity, diversity, and representation, and 100% that's something that needs to be a priority. And I can think of no better way. Yes, we need to have composers exposed to our students who don't look like me, dead or living white guys. We need to get beyond that, and we need to get beyond that for a very long time. But I can think of no better way to be culturally responsive to our students than to have every single student in our classroom be that composer.
right, that's right. And even like for those, like I know that a lot of music teachers, they have performances and concerts that they have to do, and it's not like you cannot do in any of the grades. But how do we mix it in so it's not just Bach, Beethoven, but you have a mixture? I think more people are doing, but also I've had students tell me like, oh wow, they didn't, because sometimes we're so focused on technique and getting that perfect sound and getting everything just right, that we don't we forget about that it's really about communication and connecting, and to bring that part. And then what might have inspired this composer, like learning more about the history of the composers that you are performing, and that time period and everything.
Have you seen any concerts and maybe a model that really does highlight student composition?
Well, I am a teaching artist with different organizations here in New York City, um, Lincoln Center, Carnegie Hall, and the New York Philharmonic. And the New York Philharmonic has a program called the Very Young Composers that was started by a bass player, John Deek, who is also a composer. He was a bass player of the Philharmonic years ago. And that is taking kids, whether or not they have musical experience, and working with teaching artists, where teaching artists basically serve as their scribes. So they'll take down their ideas, and some lucky few get their pieces performed by the New York Phil. So that's one example. But I think there are other examples of just like after students compose, like even having teachers, like actually Bloomingdale School of Music, they have similar idea where they work with the students, but then the other students perform the other people's music. So like students are performing students' music, which is really wonderful, because then they get to talk to each other and their peers. So
You sent me those links, and we'll make sure to put those
oh,
links that you sent me earlier into the liner notes for this episode. But to see professional musicians play these students' compositions, and one piece that I was just craving was, I want to see those kids' faces while they're hearing their music being performed professionally, because I could see nothing more than to say my identity is that of a musician, that of a composer, that of having a strong voice that I want to put out there, and music is my vehicle.
right. It's always, I mean, seeing them when in rehearsal for the first time, it's just like I know the feeling. It's like a something being born and you see it coming to life, so hear it coming to life. So it's really like it's a really moving and powerful experience. So
It's going to throw you a little curveball here that
sure.
wasn't something we talked about, but I'm curious. When we're talking about this project with the New York Phil, um, have you interacted with the members of the New York Phil as they're doing this? What does that side feel like? So these professional musicians who are playing these student compositions, have you had an opportunity to dialogue with any of them about what it was like to engage with this?
Well, with the smaller ensembles, not the entire orchestra, but some of the musicians, they're just musicians that are so eager to give voice to the students. So I really appreciate their openness and and for the rehearsal, they're there like, ask me, tell me what to do, tell me to do it differently. Like they're conversing as if, composer, performer. So they're really professional, warm, wonderful, embracing, musicians who end up playing the student composition. So I've worked with the smaller chamber groups who do it, but yeah, they love to bring the student work to life. So
I so adore this because I think oftentimes also as composers are put on a pedestal. I think when we look at an organization like New York Phil or composers such as yourself, it's like, oh, they're not approachable. That there's that fourth wall that, oh, they're up there,
right,
they're on top of the mountain, and I'm just down here. So I love how that's starting to build that sense of belonging.
right, and I think also just even with teaching or teaching artistry, like I think there was a belief that like, oh, if you're teaching it's because you're not good enough or and that I find so wrong because um, I think that I, teachers have so much to offer, and like actually like some of the professional musicians don't always make the best teachers. It's like um, there's so many different ways to be a musician, and it's too often like at first like, oh, I thought I was going to be a concert pianist and, just perform on stage. And I'm so glad that I did not take that route because I would not have been happy there. It's so much more fulfilling. I enjoy working with kids. I enjoy doing composing and the occasional performing. So it's not for everybody. And I just feel like we need to expand the definition of, or put down that pedestal like, no, we're all musicians, we're all creating here. And teaching artists work, teaching work, music educators, I think should get so much credit for what they do, for what we do.
Absolutely. And I love that there was that reframe of we because
Yeah.
the second that we think it's either K-12 or student or teaching artists, we're limiting our capacity for what we can do when we all come together with this common mission. We hinted at this earlier about utilizing creativity to be culturally responsive, to be in service of equity. In your vision right now, what do you see as the power of music and music education to help us confront so many of the challenges we're facing as a world?
Right. I mean, I think this might be preaching to the choir, but music, is such a way to express ourselves and also to join like when playing music together. It's just such a empowering, beautiful human experience. And as a pianist, I would get lonely and envious of the orchestral players. So I mean, I love doing chamber music or, being in a group, playing music together is just a really powerful experience. And I think that could help heal. And I think that if we can use music as a way to, you know, not just this toxic positivity, like, oh, but just as a way to explore more, like, how are we feeling, what was going on during this time period, or what music can we write today to help us kind of express what we're going through. I think that could help towards healing because we do need to heal together. And I think it's a long process, and music is just a wonderful way to do that. My dad was a minister, and even just like singing hymns, there's just something about playing music together that is so, I think, uplifting for the human spirit and whatever kind of music it is. And every culture, I think, has it. And they had some sort of music communal space. So it's like, how do we get back to doing that, creating music and remind one another, that we're all human beings, we're all in this together instead of all the, divisiveness. But it can help deal towards the pain and just the emotion. And I think that's why some of this music has stayed for so long because it can express so much of that through sounds or words with music.
So powerful, Beata, and I appreciate that. In my own experiences, um, I find that we need an entry point. We need some commonality to bring together. And in most of my music making experiences, whether it be where I teach or when I'm out in schools, there's often people in this space that disagree with each other, whether it be politically, philosophically, musically. Okay, different opinions of how something should be done, but at least there's that commonality now, that we have a baseline identity of we're here to make music. And I guess that's a starting point.
Yeah, I hope so. We could do more of it.
Absolutely. What's next on your plate? What are current projects that you're working on, and where are some really cool things that we can look forward to seeing your name and your work moving forward?
Oh, thank you. Well, my website, I try to keep as updated as possible, so it has a lot of the projects that I'm working on. I'm usually juggling a lot of different things, but like currently, I'm working with teaching artists from the African continent through the International Teaching Artists Collaborative. That teaching artists and even music educators can be a part of. Like, it's a great community for teaching artists of all disciplines, not just music, to come together and try to, using art and creativity and art making to for social change and to learn about other cultures. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just doing more of what I'm doing is just, composing. Um, just gave a performance for fundraiser for Partners in Health, which is an organization that tries to bring healthcare to everybody. So for me, it's just trying to incorporate helping make the world a better place and using music, whether it's teaching artistry, composing, or performing. So that's what I'm doing.
It is so clear that your moral compass is being driven by, and it affects your artistry, and that is so. For me, it's healing because it sees how it's not just music, it's not just social justice, it's not just my belief system. Those all can live together in harmony, and I so appreciate that. The last big question that I have for you is really regrounding in the why, because I think so many of us are just exhausted by the what and the how. And I think an antidote to that is to reground with the why. Why do we do this? So at its heart, why do we teach music? Why do we make music? Why is that so part of our humanity?
I think it is. I think we teach music and make music because it is about connecting as human beings. Is it about sharing together? As you said, we have differences, we have disagreements, but when we're making music together, we are bonding. There's something very powerful, and I think we need it as it's healing both emotionally, spiritually, and physically, because it's all related. Like, I know Western tends to separate, oh, this is physical, this is emotional, but it's all related, biopsychosocial, that we can't separate. That's why, like, incorporating SEL in the classroom, it's not like a separate thing, oh, I'm going to do SEL. It's like, how do we incorporate it in our lives so that we can take care of ourselves, more self-awareness, and the more we can take care of ourselves, we can take care of each other. And so, but in order to do that, we have to look within and address how we're feeling, the pain, the trauma, whatever, and look, how can we heal together and how can we grieve together? And so, how can we make music together?
To me, that's a TED Talk. It's like, okay, thank you for coming to Beata Moon's TED Talk. Here we go.
Thank
Oh, it
you.
was beautiful. Um, it's just been such an honor to share space today and to pick your brain on some of these intersections between SEL, music, creativity, composition. And I think the greatest gift you've given me is in understanding that it doesn't need to be a stop the presses. It can be so much more organic. It doesn't need to be something that is intimidating. It's something that we can all do in whatever
Right,
way. Kindergartners with
right,
shakers can be
right.
composers.
Right. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing, Scott. I've used I've used your book as for my curriculum and been sharing it, and your Save the Music series and everything.
Mm.
So thank you. And
You're
thank you to all the people watching and the teachers too for all the work that you're doing as well.
so kind, and yes, our true heroes are the ones who are using, implementing, and moving forward. Do you have any final thoughts for us before we say goodbye for today?
Um, I guess I just want to share, the self-care and just to remember to breathe. Like, just I've been trying to do this, especially during the pandemic, like the box breathing, or just because we all in this world that we're living in with so much going on that we just need to take more time to just breathe, because that does affect us emotionally and physically, and to turn off a lot of the social media, the news a lot, and then just to create, or just to whatever works for you, whether it's listening to music or playing certain pieces or trying on your own, but just to find time to create and to create with others, because that's also the joy of music making, is when you're collaborating and you're jamming and you're just having fun, and to bring that joy again, and to bring and to not let the fear, because I feel like there is so much fear in this world right now, but just to replace that with love and self-care and more music making. So
So beautiful, in whatever way that feels organic to us, and to have that variety also offered to our students.
yes.
Oh, Beata Moon, it has been such an honor to have you as a guest on our show. So thank you so very much. I know that our paths are going to be crossing again soon. So many, many thanks. And please be safe and be well.
Thank you.
What a powerful idea that every single student can be a musician, every single student can be a composer, every single student can be creative in a way to express themselves with something so true and pure as music. I want to thank Beata Moon for giving us not only a philosophical mission to allow spaces for every single student's voice to be heard, but some tangible strategies about how we can embed composition into any musical space. To take that idea that composers are only the creators of the music that we interpret, but everyone can be a composer. For me, that is identity, belonging, and agency. For Music for All, I'm Scott Edgar. Have a good night. Bye bye.